But it's a real honor and delight for me to be here and to follow Vince. Thank you. Thank you. We don't often get to this part of the country, even though I go through San Francisco or through Los Angeles over into the Asia-Pacific region where I do a lot of my speaking. But what a tremendous privilege to be in your beautiful city and enjoy your beautiful weather and also your terrific cuisine out here. It's absolutely fantastic. I'd be amiss if I don't mention cuisine because I'm a culinary guy and just enjoy great food. I'm often asked why Indians die so young. And my answer is very simple. God's getting them up there to prepare the marriage supper of the Lamb. And they're the only ones who have the recipes. So that's my word for starters. Are you hearing me all right? You're hearing me okay. Thank you so much. I want to personally thank Pastor Brian Loritz. I've known his father for many, many years, and it's wonderful to see you, Brian. We bumped into an airport some time ago. Thank you for making it possible for us to be here. Nancy, for all your hard work behind the scenes. You've done a beautiful job in preparing for us to come. And also to Ryan Patton, who worked a lot so that we got to speak at one other venue, and my good friend Human Khalili. Thank you so much, all four of you, for all your hard work in preparing for us. I speak a lot on what does it mean to be human. One day I'm going to speak on what does it mean to be human. He's a biography all by itself, an impressive guy, and persuaded us to come here. So here we are. Years ago, I was spending about 6 months in Cambridge, England. And I recall on one of our off days, my wife, Margie, and our kids went into London, and we walked into the Old Bailey, the great historic place of trials. And I didn't realize at that time you could walk into the upper galleries and find a seat there. There are 5 or 6 trials going on. You could take in one of those trials and just listen in on the arguments. But the one we stepped into, we were told we could not bring the younger of our 2 girls because it was a very restricted allowance for that particular trial. And my second daughter said, "It's okay, Dad, why don't you all go ahead? Seems a fascinating trial here," and some friends took care of our other 2 kids. So my wife, our older daughter Sarah, myself, and a couple of friends sat in. We were shocked to find out what was going on. It was the trial of a man who was in his senior years who'd been accused of rape by 2 minor girls. And because of the nature of the trial, children were not allowed below a certain age. I was not sure I really wanted to sit through it, but as the argument was being undertaken, I thought this could be a very fascinating trial to sit in on, and so we did. And as the accusation was made, my eyes kept shifting towards the older gentleman there. And you couldn't see the young gals because they were minors, but the barristers could see them, the lawyers could see them on their own television screen, and you could hear their voices. But I kept looking at that man and thinking to myself, how could somebody bring such pain and such horror to 2 young lives and mar them for the rest of their existence? So I kept looking in that direction, watching as all the accusations were being listed. Then the defense attorney took to the microphone, and he looked at the 2 television screens and could see both of the gals. They were in different rooms so that they could not collude. And he looked at them and he said, "I want you girls to know something. I am not here to hurt you. I am not here to find any fault with you. I just am interested in one thing. And I want you to hear me clearly. I'm only interested in one thing. I want you to tell me the truth when I ask you a question. If you don't know the answer, tell me that. If you can't remember, tell me that. But if you answer my question, please tell me the truth. A man's future lies in your hands. I just want the truth." Do you understand? And these such childlike voices, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." And then he began to unfold his pattern of defense. And at one point he said to them, "Why did it take you 2 months to tell your mommy and daddy what happened on that day?" And of course, they said, "Well, we were afraid and this and that and all that," so it was quite understandable. Then he planted this question. He said, "Tell me the truth. Is it true that on the day you told your mother and father, this man had seen you at such and such a place and walked over to you and told you when he got home that night he was going to come and see your parents and tell them where he saw you and what you were doing? Is that true?" And there was silence. One of them never answered, and the other one said, "I can't remember." And gradually the mood began to change to my own displeasure, because you wanted the truth. If this man indeed did what he is alleged to have done, it was a dastardly act. But if he's being falsely accused to protect some other storyline, it is equally dastardly to destroy the life of an individual. Ladies and gentlemen, we all walked away from there so confused and so dissatisfied. If in one case, for one life, on one allegation, the truth is so important, isn't it even more important for you and me to find out the truth of why we are here? What does life really amount to? This morning I was having breakfast with my nephews, one of our colleagues out of Seattle, and I was asking him how a conference went. And he said, "Uncle, there was a turning point in that conference when a young 14-year-old boy with rather thick glasses walked up to the microphone and in very slow, deliberate speech said, 'I want you all speaking to us to just answer one question for me. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here?' Because 3 times he said, 'I have tried to commit suicide, and I just want the answer to why I am here.'" There is a writing by somebody that I've never been able to track down as to who the author is, but I think it was given to us by a Canadian author at one stage, and we never really were able to track down who the original author was. But it says this: in the 1950s, kids lost their innocence. They were liberated from their parents by well-paying jobs, cars, and lyrics in music that gave rise to a new term, the generation gap. In the 1960s, kids lost their authority. It was the decade of protest. Church, state, and parents were all called into question and found wanting. Their authority was rejected, yet nothing ever replaced it. In the 1970s, kids lost their love. It was the decade of meism, dominated by hyphenated words, beginning with self. Self-image, self-esteem, self-assertion. It made for a very lonely world. Kids learned everything there was to know about sex, forgot everything there was to know about real love, and few had the nerve to tell them there was indeed a difference. In the 1990s, kids lost their hope, stripped of innocence, authority, and love, and plagued by the horror of a nuclear nightmare. Large and growing numbers of this generation have stopped believing in the future. I added this one para. In the 1990s, kids have lost themselves, trapped in a virtual world of their own, away from voices and from touch. They now talk and feel in cyberspace, losing their own individuality and actually now just talking to machines. They've lost their worth. I understand this predicament very well. Very well. Even though I have entered my 7th decade of life. It was when I was 17 years old. I remember asking the same question. What does living really mean? Why am I here? Why am I born in a culture where if you don't come at the top of your class, shame and pain can be your destiny? Why do I end up with a dad one day looking me in the eye and saying, "You're going to bring shame and embarrassment to this family"? And he was right the way I was headed. He was trying to jolt me into reality. And there at the age of 17, having tried to take my own life, I ended up unconscious, and then with a doctor who made me well. And his last words were to me, "Beta," which is the Hindi word for son. "Beta, I have given you back your life, but there's one thing I cannot do. I cannot make you want to live. I've given you back your life, but I cannot make you want to live." But it was in that hospital bed that a Bible was brought to me, that I had never owned one, that I had never opened one. And a man came and brought the Bible, was not allowed to read it to me because I was in critical care. And he gave it to my mother to read from John chapter 14. Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me." Nobody there to explain it. So I want to talk to you tonight about this very simple pursuit of truth and why I believe it is in the person of Jesus Christ we find not only the truth, but also the way and the life, and why he is the answer to the deepest hungers of your heart and mine. And I just ask you to give us a patient listening. I only have a few minutes in which to do it. I cannot go on an extended journey of thought here, but I want to at least try and set the trail in place. It was Natan Sharansky, the former justice minister of Israel, who after he'd left the former Soviet Union and moved back to his homeland in Israel, years later asked if he could go back to the Lefortovo prison where he'd been incarcerated for solitary confinement. And he took his wife and he went back, and they took him into the prison. And as he was about to enter, he put his arm out and told his wife, "Please let me go back there for a moment by myself before you come in. I'll let you in after a few minutes, but I want to be there alone, because this is where I really found myself." And he walked into that dungeon-like setting, put his face in his hands, and sobbed with memory after memory after memory. And after he came out, there was a battery of microphones waiting for him, but he didn't respond. He said, "Could you please first take me to the grave of Andrei Sakharov, the Russian physicist who gave to the Soviets the nuclear bomb?" So they took him to the grave. He laid a wreath on the grave, and then he spoke to the press. And here's what he said: "Mr. Sakharov, who gave us the most powerful weapon we have, before he died made this comment: 'I always thought the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb.' He said, 'I've changed my mind. The most powerful weapon in the world is not the bomb. The most powerful weapon in the world is the truth.'" Telling that to the Soviets was a powerful statement where he was challenging the regime to come in correspondence with reality and not to manufacture a reality of their own. Because pravda means truth, with all kinds of false stories that are often printed therein. Winston Churchill during the war gave a speech in which he said this: "I always thought that the most valuable thing in the world was something else." He said, "Now I've come to the realization that the most valuable thing in the world is the truth." Sakharov, the most powerful weapon in the world is the truth. Churchill, the most valuable thing in the world is the truth. What does truth really mean? Is it purely abstract? Is it just an idea for a courtroom? Or does it provide the boundaries for your life and mine? I want to read for you two statements by Malcolm Muggeridge, which will put me on the track to what I want to say to you as I bring you at least a brief answer. Muggeridge was the man whom I had longed to meet for many, many years. I'd read just about everything he'd written. I think possibly the most eloquent English journalist of the 20th century. They say it's a toss-up between him and G.K. Chesterton, both of whom became moral philosophers in their writing. Here's what Muggeridge said: "Truth is very beautiful, more so I consider than justice, which is today's easy pursuit, which can also easily put on a false face. In the nearly 7 decades I have lived through, the world has overflowed with bloodshed and explosions, whose dust has never had time to settle before others have erupted, all in purportedly just causes. The lies on behalf of which our wars have been fought and our peace treaties concluded, the lies of revolution and of counter-revolution, the lies of advertising, of news, of salesmanship, of politics, the lies of the priest in his pulpit, the professor at the podium, the journalist at the typewriter, the lie now stuck like a fishbone in the throat of the handheld microphone and in the hands of the prowling cameraman. Ignatius alone told me once how when he was a member of the old Comintern, some stratagem was under discussion, and a delegate, a newcomer who had never attended before, made the extraordinary observation that if such and such a statement were ever to be made, it ought not to be made because it wouldn't be true. There was a moment of dazed, stunned silence. Then everyone began to laugh. They laughed and laughed till the tears ran down their cheeks and the Kremlin walls began to shake. The same laughter echoes in every council chamber and cabinet room. Wherever two or more are gathered to exercise authority, it is truth that has died, not God, says Malcolm Muggeridge. It's truth that has died, not God. But then he went on to make this profound comment, and you must hear it, as only Muggeridge in his inimitable way can say it. In this Sargasso sea of fantasy and fraud, how can anyone else I or anyone else hope to swim unencumbered? How can I learn to see through and not just with the eye? How can I take off my own motley, wash away the makeup, raise the iron shutter and put out the studio lights, silence the sound effects and put the cameras to sleep? Can I ever watch the sunrise on Sunset Boulevard and the sunset over Forest Lawn? Will I ever find real furniture among the studio props, silence in a discotheque, love in a striptease, read truth off an auto cue, chase it on the wings of Muzak, view it in living color with the news, or hear it in living sound along the motorways? No, not in the wind that rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks, not in the earthquake that followed, nor in the fire that followed the earthquake. I think I could probably hear it in that still small voice if I could only catch it. Not in the screeching of tires either, or the grinding of brakes, or the roar of jets, or the whistle of sirens, or the howl of trombones, or the rattle of drums, or the chanting of demo voices. Again and again and again, I long for that still small voice, if I could only catch it, the voice of God. In this clutter of noise, how can I ever hope to hear what life is all about? Muggeridge has touched the nerve of the question. Truth may be described philosophically as that which corresponds to the propositional reality that is asserted. That's a theoretical description, but truth ultimately is the pursuit of existential meaning and significance in your life and mine. So it's not just truth about life, it's truth about what life is truly about. And as I look at where America is headed and where we've lost our definitions, where we can ultimately find meaning in front of a screen rather than spending time in relationships, where we can spend so much time in boardrooms and chambers and not listen to the cry of our kids or their voices, we have to find answers. We have to find balance. We have to find the truth about what life is all about. But what has actually happened as a result now, we have come to this postmodern philosophy, starting off with rationalism, moving on to metaphysical skepticism, and then heading on to empiricism, and then existentialism, and now in postmodernism. If you were to give 3 phraseological descriptions of postmodernism, this is what it would be. No truth, no meaning, no certainty. No truth, no meaning, no certainty. You take truth, meaning, and certainty out of life, what have you got? Empty bodies moving from day to day without any concept of destiny or real meaning. Let me just give you a very simple example of this and then try to draw it to a close. My grandson, Jude, is about to celebrate one of his birthdays a few weeks from now, and we are reminded of it constantly. When he was 3.5 years old, his mother, my daughter Naomi, had lost her car keys. And she was running around the house looking for it, and she finally slapped her forehead and said, "I must be losing my mind." And this little guy, and he's a very little guy, comes in front of her, and he looks at his mother and he says, "Mommy, whatever you do, Please don't ever lose your heart, because I'm in there. The Bible says, out of the mouths of babes you have ordained praise. Chesterton said, I have learned more from observing children than I have ever learned from attending lectures in philosophy. How did we end up in a world where so little is really going on in our heart that matters, and so much is going on in the mind that will ultimately one day disappear as a vapor? 3 moods: secularization, pluralization, and privatization. Those are not my terms. They were graphically described by the brilliant social thinker Peter Berger in the 70s and 80s. I had an interview with Peter Berger once as he visited our office in Atlanta, and I talked to him about this. And it is fascinating how he even retracted some of his own thinking from those days. A very, very honorable man. But he talked about 3 moods coming in the 70s: secularization, pluralization, privatization. Secularization, where religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. Hear me again. Where religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. That's what America is. Seculum, this worldly. Fascinating. At a time where India is moving more towards its roots in Hinduism, where the Middle East is moving mainly more back to the Islamic worldview, we in this secularized worldview have not only marginalized religious ideas, we have evicted them from any discussion. And if anyone brings a transcendent worldview into the discussion, he or she is ipso facto dismissed as being highly prejudiced and subjective, while everyone else is considered thoroughly objective and rational. But what happens if you take secularization to its logical outworking? I'll tell you what happens. Ultimately, you will build a generation and a society which has lost its sense of shame. Because definitions are gone. Definitions are lost. There is no ultimate ontic referent for value definitions. This was the first temptation faced in the created order. What was the temptation? Do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because in the day you do this, you'll surely die. Now, we have spent more time discussing the apple. You know, as one of my professors used to say, the problem was not the apple on the tree, it was the pear on the ground. So what is it that's going on? You know what's going on? Who is going to be the definer of good and evil? That's what's going on. Don't play God. There's only one prohibition. Don't play God. And once we violated that law, think of the thousands of laws that we now have to have. The health law, the healthcare laws go into thousands of pages. You can't even get onto a plane without them telling you don't touch, tamper, disable, or destroy the smoke detector. They just say don't mess with it. Why is it touch, tamper, disable, destroy? Because every word dies the death of 1,000 qualifications in a courtroom. Because we violated the first law, not to be the definer of good and evil. That's precisely what has happened. We have become the definers of good and evil, and we are now autonomous, a law unto ourselves. Secularization, going to its logical outworking, will lead to a generation without shame. Pluralization will ultimately lead to illogic. You hear these statements, all religions are fundamentally the same and superficially different. Anybody who says that doesn't understand these religions. They're not fundamentally the same and superficially different. They are superficially the same and fundamentally different. The primary assertions are very varied in all of these. And if you take pluralization to its logical outworking in a culture, and by the way, all these things are good things. I mean, if you go to Los Angeles, you can see a fast food outlet where a Korean is selling kosher tacos. Now, that's brilliant pluralization in cuisine. I think it's marvelous. Pluralization is a good thing. When I came to Canada, I was 20 years old, and I was desperately looking for an Indian restaurant. There was one, it was called India House, which was an absolute disgrace and a kind of an offense to the Indian palate. And I hoped and prayed that they will ultimately shut down and some genuine Indian cook will come. Today, if you go to Toronto, when I came to Toronto in 1966, there were 500 Indians in Toronto. Today, there are 500,000 Indians in Toronto. If you go into the airport and just shout, Mr. Singh, half a dozen of them are about to turn around you. I love it. I love it. Our team is full of international speakers. Love the accents, love the perspectives, love the insights, love the languages. There are some things I can still say in Hindi that I don't think I can ever fully translate into English. There's a phrase, if you insult somebody, they'll say, Izzat ka faluda bana diya hai. You know what that means? You have taken my self-respect and made a spaghetti out of it. How graphic. Pluralization is a good thing. It's a good thing. But if pluralization leads you to believe that logic no longer applies to reality, you are violating the very systemic necessity with which we were framed. Secularization can lead to no shame, pluralization to no reason, and finally, privatization can lead to no meaning. What is privatization in America? We're told again and again, believe whatever you want to believe in the sacred, but keep it to your private life. Don't bring it into the public world. There's an amputation that goes on. And you're not allowed to carry the sacredness of your private belief into the public theater or the public arena. What happens then is the death of meaning. Death of meaning. Songwriters say this long before philosophers will say it. They will touch the nerve of reality. King Crimson writing in the 60s, Cat's Foot, Iron Claw, neurosurgeons scream for more, from paranoia's poison door, 21st century schizoid man. Blood rack, barbed wire, politicians, funeral pyre, innocents raped with napalm fire, 21st century schizoid man. Death seed, blind man's greed, poets starving, children bleed, nothing is God he really needs, 21st century schizoid man. The walls on which the prophets wrote is cracking at the seams. Upon the instruments of death the sunlight brightly gleams. Will no one lay the laurel wreath as silence drowns the screams? Between the iron gates of fate the seeds of time are sown, watered by the deeds of those who know and who are known. Knowledge is a deadly friend when no one sets the rules. The fate of all mankind I seize in the hands of fools. Confusion will be my epitaph as I crawl a cracked and broken path. If we make it, we can all sit back and laugh, but I'm afraid tomorrow I'll be crying. The Moody Blues, why do we never get an answer when we're knocking at the door with 1,000 million questions about hate and death and war? Because when we stop and look around us, there's nothing that we need in a world of persecution that is whirling in its greed. Why do we never get an answer when we're knocking on the door? And it ends with this: I'm looking for a miracle in my life. I'm looking for someone to change my life. There's the answer. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. If you turn to the scriptures in John 3:16, there's a very simple verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Depending on which translation you take, it's about 30-some words. I read it one day and I just wrote this down. I said, it's amazing. I read it again and again and again. What do I see in here? The starting point is filial. God is our heavenly Father. The giving is unconditional. He gave. The reception is relational, so that whoever believes, the range is eternal, shall have everlasting life. And the core is judicial, because there is a moral law at work in this world. Filial, unconditional, relational, eternal, judicial. Years ago, I was driving through the main highway in Toronto where we lived at that time. My wife's from Canada. We were living in Toronto. And it was a snowy night, and I saw a figure tottering on the side, and I said, what on earth, am I seeing something, or is this real? And I slowed down. I was already going slow because the highway was slippery. and it was surely a young man. I gradually pulled to a slow halt. I want to make sure I didn't get too close and hit him in any way. I got out of my car and he was just swaggering like this. I said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Sir, I'm lost. Can you take me to my home in Downsview?" I said, "I'm not heading there, but I will. I'll take you." So he got in and he said to me, "Thank you for stopping on a night like this. You don't know who I am." I said, "No, I really don't. But you were going to get hit out there." He said, "What do you do?" I was young in ministry. I said, "I'm a speaker." He said, "What do you speak about?" I said, "I speak about God and about Christ's answer." He was not completely clear in his thinking. I said, "I'm leaving tomorrow morning to go to Calgary or Edmonton, somewhere. I'll fly back. Can I see you next week?" He said, "Yes, please." He said, "Can I have your address?" I said, "Yes." I gave it to him. I said, "Can I have yours?" He said, "You exchanged." I said, "When I come back, I'm going to call you." When I came back, there was a message waiting for me. He'd burned himself to death. And in that envelope, he'd written these words: "Lost in a world of darkness, without a guiding light, seeking a friend to help my struggling, failing plight. So all of you good people just go on passing by, leaving me with nothing but this lonely will to die. For somewhere in this lonely world of sorrow and of woe, there's a place for me to hide, but where I do not know. But wherever I go, I never can escape the devil's reaching, clutching hands, or the drink of fermented grape. So perhaps out of my grief and anguish, some wandering boy will see and learn to build his own life true and good and free." They are connected. Truth, goodness, and freedom. I present to you Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, who loves you and me. And God is good, and He seeks the best in your heart and mine. I learned that at the age of 17. I have only grown deeper and deeper in my love for Him. And when you learn to follow Him, you will find the truth of exactly what I am saying to you. Without shame, without reason, and without meaning, the world is skidding out of control. Christ offers eternal life within the moral law that He has put in this world. We would love to interact with you now. Thank you so much for giving both of us a patient hearing. God bless you.